The clock on the microwave read 6:42 a.m. when the sound began. It was a low, guttural scrape, the sound of heavy things being dragged across asphalt. I stood at my kitchen window, nursing the first cup of coffee of the day, a ritual unchanged for the 11 years since Eleanor had passed. From this vantage point, I could see the entire length of my driveway, the neat square of my front lawn, and the quiet curve of Hemlock Lane. The world was still washed in that pre-dawn blue, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows, and in that blue gloom, a flatbed truck with a small crane was depositing a series of massive, gray, concrete barriers at the end of my driveway. There were 3 of them, Jersey barriers technically, the kind you see sectioning off highway construction zones. Each one weighed at least 600 pounds. They were being placed with deliberate precision, forming an impenetrable wall between my property and the street. Supervising the operation, standing with her arms crossed and a look of profound satisfaction on her face, was Carol Fletcher, president of the Northwood Pines Homeowners Association. She wore a bright pink tracksuit that seemed to defy the somber morning light. I took another sip of coffee. It was black, no sugar. I watched them place the 3rd and final block, sealing me in completely. The truck driver, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, got her signature on a clipboard, and then drove away, leaving Carol to admire her handiwork. She turned, her gaze sweeping across the front of my house until it landed on the kitchen window where I stood. She couldn't see me through the reflection, but she knew I was there. She smiled, a thin, triumphant little thing. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup, and placed it in the dishwasher. I put on my worn leather work boots, grabbed my phone, and walked out the front door. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. I walked down the blue stone path that ran alongside the driveway, stopping a few feet from the concrete barricade. Carol was still there, waiting. This was the performance, and she needed an audience. "Good morning, Arthur," she said. Her voice was artificially sweet, the kind of tone one uses for a difficult child. "As you can see, the association has taken steps to secure the common area." I didn't say anything. I raised my phone and started recording a video. I made sure to pan slowly across the 3 concrete blocks, the end of my driveway, and then settled the frame on her face. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice losing some of its sugar. "Documenting," I said. My own voice was calm, level. "For the record, could you please state your name and your official position?" She puffed up, her sense of authority overriding her momentary discomfort. "I am Carol Fletcher, president of the Northwood Pines Homeowners Association." "And Carol Fletcher," I continued, keeping the phone steady, "are you confirming that you, in your capacity as HOA president, ordered the placement of these barriers, which are obstructing my private driveway?" "This is not your private driveway," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the asphalt just beyond the concrete. "This is an unauthorized access point that crosses HOA common property. You've been given numerous warnings. You've been fined. Now the board has voted to rectify the situation permanently. You'll receive a bill for the installation and a further fine for your continued non-compliance. If you attempt to move these, I'll have you arrested for destruction of HOA property." She delivered the lines as if she had rehearsed them in the mirror. Threats of financial ruin, assertions of ownership, the invocation of a faceless board. It was her standard script. I zoomed in slightly on her face. "Thank you," I said, and then I stopped the recording. I saved the file, naming it barrier_incident_Fletcher_statement, and backed it up to my cloud storage. I turned and walked back toward my house. "That's it?" she called after me, her voice shrill with disbelief. She had expected a shouting match, a scene, a fight she could win through sheer volume and righteous indignation. She had not expected quiet procedure. "You can't park on the street, Arthur. Your old truck is an eyesore. You're trapped. What are you going to do now?" I paused at my front door and looked back at her. The first rays of sun were just starting to crest the trees, catching the sharp edges of the concrete blocks. She stood there, a small tyrant on her freshly conquered territory, absolutely certain of her victory. She had no idea. She had no idea who I was, what I did for 42 years, or what I had been quietly doing for the 2 years she had been in charge. She had no idea that this ugly, brutish wall of concrete wasn't a prison. It was a gift. It was evidence. It was the beginning of her end, and she had just signed for its delivery. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain how we got here, to understand why a 600-pound block of concrete was less of a problem and more of a beautifully documented, legally actionable tort. You have to understand the foundation of the matter. And I have always been a man who believes in a solid foundation. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 71 years old. For 42 years I was a licensed civil engineer. My specialty was land development and municipal infrastructure. I didn't design buildings. I designed the world they sat on. I laid out roads, graded subdivisions, calculated stormwater runoff, and wrote the technical specifications for easements, rights of way, and property boundaries. I spent my entire professional life in the world of plats, deeds, covenants, and county records. I speak that language more fluently than I speak conversational English. Rules, real rules, written down and filed with the clerk of courts, are the bedrock of my world. They are not suggestions. They are not open to interpretation by someone with a binder and a grudge. They are, on paper, the law. I am a widower. My wife, Eleanor, was the heart of our home. She handled the people, the parties, the neighborhood small talk. I handled the leaky faucets, the tax returns, and the quiet hum of the house's machinery. When she died, the silence she left behind was vast. I filled it with routine. I tended the garden she planted. I worked on the 1986 Ford F-150 we bought together, its engine a puzzle of tangible problems I could solve with my hands. I lived a quiet, orderly life. I didn't bother anyone, and I expected the same in return. We bought this house in 1988. Northwood Pines wasn't a subdivision then, just a tract of land with a few old houses on it. Our house was one of them. My driveway, the very one currently blocked by Carol's concrete ambitions, was poured in 1989. It connects to Hemlock Lane, which was, at the time, a county road. The developer bought the surrounding acreage in the mid-90s. When they laid out the new subdivision, they had to incorporate the existing properties. I was there. I reviewed the preliminary plat map myself, as a professional courtesy to the engineering firm that was handling it. My property, my driveway, my access rights were all noted, recorded, and grandfathered in before the Northwood Pines Homeowners Association was ever chartered. It was all on paper, filed in a dusty cabinet at the county courthouse. Carol Fletcher and her husband moved in 5 years ago. They bought one of the new, larger houses on the cul-de-sac. She was a woman who vibrated with unused energy and a desperate need for a purpose. She found it 2 years ago, when the previous largely ceremonial HOA president retired. Carol launched a campaign. She went door to door with homemade cookies and pamphlets promising to restore community values and protect property values. She won by a handful of votes in a low-turnout election, and then the reign of petty tyranny began. It started small. Memos about the precise shade of beige for mailbox posts. Rulings on the maximum allowable height for lawn grass, measured to the quarter-inch. Fines for leaving garbage cans at the curb for more than 12 hours. She created a web of intricate, often contradictory rules, most of them invented on the spot and distributed in a self-important monthly newsletter. The older residents grumbled, but mostly just paid the $25 fines to make her go away. It was easier than fighting. Her focus landed on me about a year ago. She decided my vintage F-150, which I kept immaculate in my driveway, was a commercial vehicle and an eyesore. It began with polite, then less polite notes, tucked under my windshield wiper. I ignored them. My truck was registered as a personal, historic vehicle. It was parked on my private property. Her rules did not apply. My silence, my complete lack of engagement, infuriated her. It was a denial of her power. This is when I started the folder. It was a simple manila folder. On the tab I wrote HOA. Inside, I placed her first official notice of violation. Then, the second. I paid the $100 fine with a cashier's check, making a photocopy of the check and the certified mail receipt before sending it. I kept the receipts. I started printing out her threatening emails. I saved every newsletter. When she fined my neighbor Mr. Henderson for his son's portable basketball hoop, I took a picture of the hoop and printed out the email he forwarded me, adding it to my file. The folder grew thicker. It was no longer just a file. It was a chronology of overreach, a documented history of abuse of power. It was a project, and I am very, very good at projects. The failed warning came 6 months ago, after a particularly nasty letter from her regarding the truck, threatening to have it towed at my expense. I decided a preemptive, formal clarification was in order. I typed a simple, one-page letter. I cited the relevant county codes regarding historic vehicles and private property rights. I attached 2 documents. The first was a certified copy of my original property deed. The second was a high-resolution scan of the section of the 1996 subdivision plat map, the one filed with the county, showing my lot, Block C, Lot 4, with its existing driveway clearly marked and noted as pre-existing, non-conforming access. I sent this package to her via certified mail, return receipt requested. This is a crucial step. It creates a legal record that the recipient either received the information or refused it. A week later, the package came back to me. Across the front, in thick red marker, she had scrawled, "Refused, not applicable, governed by HOA covenants," and then signed her name. I didn't open it. I took the entire returned, unopened envelope and I placed it in a plastic sleeve. It went into the folder. Her refusal to even look at the official documents was, in its own way, more valuable than if she had read them and ignored them. It was a willful, documented ignorance. On paper, she had been served. So, when I walked back into my house, leaving Carol fuming in my driveway, I was not defeated. I was not trapped. I was ready. I went back to my desk and got to work. My first call was not to a lawyer. It was not to the police. It was to a young man named David Chen. David had been my protege at the engineering firm before I retired. He was bright, meticulous, and now one of the lead surveyors. "Arthur, good to hear from you. How's retirement?" he asked, his voice cheerful. "It's about to get interesting, David," I said. "I have a job for you, a professional survey. I need my property lines staked. All of them. And I need specific attention paid to the public right-of-way and the apron of my driveway where it meets Hemlock Lane. I need it done today if possible, and I need the final stamped survey map delivered to me by tomorrow morning." There was a pause. "Is everything all right, Arthur?" "Everything is proceeding according to a clear and predictable sequence of events," I said. "Just send me the bill." He promised to be there within 2 hours. My next step was to retreat to my home office. For years, this room had been my sanctuary, a place of quiet work. Now it became a command center. I pulled out the HOA folder. It was nearly 3 inches thick. I spent the next hour methodically scanning every single document into my computer. Every notice, every canceled check, every returned letter, every newsletter, every photograph. I created a master PDF file, organizing them chronologically. I named it Fletcher_chronology. I saved it to a thumb drive, backed it up to my encrypted cloud service, and emailed a copy to my personal email address for triple redundancy. Data should always be redundant. While I was working, I heard David's truck pull up. Through my office window, I saw him and his assistant setting up their tripod and total station. Carol was still out there, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk like a caged animal. She immediately accosted them. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language was aggressive. David, to his credit, was a picture of professional calm. He showed her his permit, pointed to the existing survey markers, and then he and his assistant simply got to work, ignoring her completely. She had no authority over a licensed surveyor performing a legal survey. Her power was performative, and when faced with quiet, professional competence, it evaporated. With the digital file secure, I moved on to the next phase. I opened the original documents for the Northwood Pines development, which I had requested from the county records office months ago as part of my project. I wasn't just interested in my own property, but in the very legal foundation of the HOA itself. I had the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, and the covenants, conditions and restrictions, the CC and Rs. The documents Carol waved around were in a neat, professionally printed binder. The ones I had were photocopies of the original, filed documents, complete with county stamps and signatures, and that's when I found it. The bombshell. It was on page 14 of the CC and Rs, a section titled Amendment. It detailed the process for changing the covenants, a vote of no less than 2/3 of the membership, with the change being recorded and filed with the county clerk of courts to be legally binding, standard procedure. But as I read the filed version and compared it to the version in Carol's latest newsletter, I saw a discrepancy. Her version contained an entire extra section, 11.4b, which stated, "The Association Board reserves the right to control, modify, or eliminate any property access point that abuts association common areas for the purposes of safety, security, and aesthetic uniformity." This was the clause she was using to justify her actions. This clause did not exist in the official document on file with the county. My breath caught. This wasn't just overreach anymore. This was fraud. I looked closer at the documents. The last legally filed amendment was from 2005 regarding satellite dishes. Who had added section 11.4 ABB? When? I called my old friend Maria, a paralegal who had worked with me for 20 years and was now a senior administrator at the county clerk's office. "Maria, it's Arthur Pendleton," I said. "Arthur, you old ghost. I thought you'd be halfway to Florida by now." She laughed. "Not yet. I have a question for you. I'm looking at the Northwood Pines HOA covenants. Can you tell me if any amendments have been filed since 2005? I could hear her typing. "Let's see. Northwood, nope. Last one on record is document 2005-3881, filed July 17, 2005. Nothing since. Why?" "Because my copy of the HOA rules has a few extra paragraphs," I said, my voice tight. "Maria, could you do me a favor? Could you pull the original incorporation documents and check the signature of the founding board president? A man named Robert Sorensen." "Sure, honey. Give me a minute." "Okay, got it. What about it?" "I'm going to email you a photo of a signature from a document I have. Tell me if they match." I sent her a picture of the signature page from an amended rules document Carol had distributed last year. The pause on the other end of the line was long. "Arthur, where did you get this? It's not just a mismatch. The signature on the document you sent me, it's a forgery, a bad one. The S is completely wrong, and it's missing his middle initial. Robert always used his middle initial. This isn't even close." I closed my eyes. There it was. The cornerstone of her entire regime was a lie, built on a forged document. She hadn't just misinterpreted the rules. She had invented them. She had been fining people, threatening them, and now blockading my driveway, all based on a power she had granted herself with a pen. I kept the receipts. But this was better than a receipt. This was a smoking gun. I thanked Maria, hung up, and took a deep, slow breath. The game had changed. This was no longer a civil dispute. This was a criminal matter. I activated the new trail camera I had purchased last month, a high-definition model disguised as a birdhouse. I positioned it in the oak tree overlooking my driveway, giving it a perfect clear view of the concrete barriers and anyone who approached them. Then, I waited. The next move was hers. I knew it wouldn't take long. The following morning, as expected, was stage 2 of the operation. My friend Tom, who owns a small construction company, arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. He wasn't in a tow truck. He was driving a flatbed trailer, and on it sat a Cat 305, a compact excavator. It was overkill, certainly, but it made a statement. Overkill was part of the plan. David Chen had delivered the certified survey map late the previous afternoon. Fresh wooden stakes with bright orange flagging tape now marked the 4 corners of my property. A nail and washer, the surveyor's official mark, was set precisely at the point where my driveway met the public right-of-way. According to the survey, which was now a legal document, the concrete barriers were sitting 6 inches inside my property line, not on common ground, not in a gray area. Mine. As Tom unloaded the excavator, its steel tracks clanking on the ramp, Carol emerged from her house across the street. She was dressed for battle in another brightly colored tracksuit, phone already pressed to her ear. She was shouting into it, her voice a theatrical screech of panic. "Yes, he's brought in heavy machinery. He's going to destroy everything. You have to stop him." She was, of course, calling the sheriff. This was exactly what I wanted. A neutral, third-party authority to witness the events. A professional who would write a report. Another piece of paper for my folder. 2 deputies from the county sheriff's department arrived within 10 minutes. A seasoned sergeant. His name tag read Miller, and a much younger deputy named Evans. Sergeant Miller had the weary, patient look of a man who had seen every possible flavor of neighborhood dispute. Carol intercepted them before they were even out of their patrol car. She launched into her performance. "Thank God you're here, officers. This man," she pointed at me, where I stood calmly by my front porch, "is unstable. He's threatening to destroy association property. He's been fined repeatedly for violations, and now he's resorted to this aggression." She waved her hands at the excavator as if it were a siege engine. She was holding her thick HOA binder, clutching it to her chest like a shield. Sergeant Miller listened, his expression unreadable. He let her finish her entire tirade, then turned to me. "Sir, can I get your side of the story?" I walked over, keeping a respectful distance. "Good morning, Sergeant," I said quietly. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am the owner of this property. I didn't present a binder. I presented 3 documents. I handed him a laminated card with my driver's license. I handed him a certified copy of my property deed, and I handed him the freshly stamped survey map David had prepared. As you can see from the survey, which was completed yesterday by a licensed state surveyor, those concrete barriers have been illegally placed on my private property, obstructing my legal access," I explained. "The woman who ordered their placement is Ms. Carol Fletcher. I have a video of her admitting to it. I am now having the illegal obstruction removed from my land. My contractor has all the required permits to operate his machinery." Sergeant Miller took the documents. He studied the survey map for a long moment, his eyes tracing the property lines, the notes, the surveyor's official seal. Deputy Evans looked over his shoulder, his eyes wide. He was getting an education. This was the difference between assertion and documentation. Carol was asserting authority. I was demonstrating ownership. "Miss Fletcher," Sergeant Miller said, turning back to her. His voice was flat, all business now. "Do you have a legal document, a deed or a court order, that gives your association ownership or control over Mr. Pendleton's driveway?" Carol was momentarily flustered. It's in the covenants," she stammered, fumbling with her binder. "Section 11.4b, all access points." "That binder is not a legal document recorded with the county, Sergeant," I interjected calmly. "This plat map is, as is my deed. Her binder is for all legal purposes fiction." Miller looked from my documents to her binder and back again. A decision had been made. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter," he said, handing my papers back to me. "I can't see any legal justification for me to stop this man from removing an object from his own property. In fact, these barriers could be considered illegal dumping. Carol's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, outrage, and finally sputtering fury. "Are you serious? You're taking his side? He's breaking the rules." "Ma'am, I am not taking anyone's side," Sergeant Miller said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I am looking at the official documents. He has them. You do not. I would advise you to return to your property and contact an attorney if you wish to pursue this. If you continue to interfere, you could be charged with harassment." He then turned to me. "Sir, I'll be filing a report on this incident. Would you like to add anything for the record?" "Yes, thank you, Sergeant," I said, making eye contact. "Please note in your report that the barriers were placed by order of Carol Fletcher, that I presented a valid deed and survey map confirming my ownership, and that she was unable to provide any legal documentation to support her claim. Please also note that the property survey markers are clearly visible." He nodded, jotting notes in his pad. "Will do." He handed me his card. "Call us if you have any more trouble." The deputies got back in their car and drove away. Carol stood on the sidewalk, utterly defeated. The law, the actual, uniformed law, had not bent to her will. Her performance had failed. Tom, my friend with the excavator, had been watching the whole thing with a grin. He gave me a thumbs up. "Ready to move some concrete, Arthur?" he asked. "By all means," I said. Tom fired up the excavator. With surgical precision, he slipped the bucket's teeth under the first barrier, lifted it effortlessly, and swung it onto the flatbed. He repeated the process twice more. The entire removal operation took less than 15 minutes. Before the sun was fully above the trees, my driveway was clear. Carol had retreated into her house, but I could see the curtains twitching in her front window. I had won the battle, but I knew the war wasn't over. Her public humiliation would only make her more desperate. Her next move would be through the HOA's legal channels. I needed to be ready, and I needed allies. The foundation was laid. The fraud was discovered. The authorities were now on record. It was time to build the case. That afternoon I received a visitor. It was Mr. Henderson from 2 houses down. He was a quiet man in his late 60s, a retired accountant who had lived in the neighborhood even longer than I had. I'd seen him get bullied by Carol over everything from the state of his lawn to the color of his welcome mat. He approached my porch hesitantly, twisting a baseball cap in his hands. "Arthur," he said, his voice low, "I saw what happened this morning. With the sheriff. That was something else." "Just a disagreement over property lines, George," I said, offering him a seat on the porch swing. He shook his head. "It was more than that. You stood up to her. Nobody does that." He sat down, still fidgeting with his cap. "Listen, I might have something that can help you. I don't know if it's anything, but—" He pulled out his phone. "Carol called an emergency board meeting 2 nights ago to approve the barriers," he explained. "It was just her and her 2 cronies, Susan and Mark. My kitchen window is right across from her living room. I saw them in there, and I had a bad feeling. So I put my phone on record and set it on my windowsill. The window was open a crack. My heart beat a little faster. This was the fearful ally, the one with the conscience." He fumbled with the phone for a moment and then played the audio file. The quality was tinny, but Carol's voice was unmistakable, sharp and imperious. "A clear message needs to be sent," her recorded voice said. "Arthur Pendleton thinks he's above the rules. He's been nothing but a thorn in my side since I took office. We have to make an example of him." Then Mark's voice hesitant. "But Carol, are you sure about this? The driveway, it's been there forever. What if he's right? What if it's legally his?" And then came the gold. "I don't care if it's his," Carol snapped back. "Our rules say we control the access points. That's what matters. On paper, we're in charge. Besides, possession is 9/10 of the law. Once those barriers are there, what's he going to do? That old man isn't going to fight back. We'll bury him in fines and legal fees. We just need to vote. All in favor?" There were 3 faint ayes. Then the recording ended. I looked at George Henderson. He looked terrified, as if he'd just handed over a state secret. "She admits it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She admits her intent. She admits she doesn't care about the legality. This is a confession. I didn't know what to do with it, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I was afraid she'd find out and come after me. You did the right thing by bringing it to me, George, I said, putting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Will you allow me to use this? And will you be willing to testify about it if it came to that? He took a deep breath and nodded, a look of resolve hardening his features. Yes. It's time someone put a stop to her. What she did to you, that's not right. What she did to my family over a basketball hoop, that wasn't right either. He emailed me the audio file. I saved it immediately, naming it Henderson_recording_malice_aforethought. Another critical piece for the folder. The coalition began to form later that evening. I received an email from a burner account. The subject line was simply Northwood Pines Board. The sender was Sarah Jenkins, the third member of the HOA board, the one who wasn't part of Carol's inner circle. She was a young lawyer who worked in the city. The email was brief. Mr. Pendleton, I was out of town for the emergency meeting. I just returned and heard what happened. I cannot condone Carol's actions. They were not approved by a legal quorum, and they were based on a section of the CC&RS that I have never been able to find in the official county records. I've suspected for months that she's been operating with a fraudulent set of bylaws. Attached are the internal financial requests she submitted for the barrier rental and delivery. You will note she listed the expense under common area, landscaping, and maintenance. She lied to the board and misused HOA funds. Please use this as you see fit. I am prepared to resign from the board and issue a formal statement. Attached were the PDF's invoices, expense reports, all signed by Carol. Another beautiful, undeniable paper trail. Sarah was the disillusioned insider, breaking ranks at the most critical moment. I now had it all: the property records, the photographic and video evidence, the sheriff's report, a recording proving malice, and an insider witness with financial documents proving fraud. The case was no longer just solid. It was hermetically sealed. The final piece fell into place the next afternoon. As I knew she would, Carol escalated. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my door. It was from the HOA's law firm. Inside was a formal cease and desist order, demanding I make no further alterations to the common area access point, and a notice of a $5,000 fine for unauthorized destruction of association property, the barriers. It also informed me that an emergency executive hearing of the full board was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse to address my escalating pattern of violations. This letter was her final, fatal mistake. She had now engaged a law firm and had them put her fraudulent claims onto their official letterhead. She had taken her fiction and paid a lawyer to certify it. It was the capstone on my pyramid of evidence. I picked up the phone and called a number I hadn't called in years. It was the private line for Eleanor's nephew, Michael, who was now a partner at a major law firm downtown. "Uncle Arthur, is everything okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. "Everything is fine, Michael," I said. "Actually, it's better than fine. I think I'm about to have some fun. I need to hire you, or rather, I need to hire your sharpest, most aggressive litigation associate. I have a file for her. I think she'll find it very, very complete." The night of the hearing, the community clubhouse was packed. Word had spread. This wasn't just another boring HOA meeting about budgets or lawn care. This was a showdown. The room was divided. On one side sat Carol's supporters, a collection of residents who either genuinely liked her iron-fisted rule or were too intimidated to cross her. On the other side sat a growing number of residents who had been waiting for a champion. George Henderson and his wife, Sarah Jenkins, the board member, and a dozen other families who had been fined or harassed over the years. I sat in the front row with my lawyer, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davis. On the table in front of us was a laptop and a projector, aimed at a large white screen on the wall. My folder, the physical copy, sat next to it. A silent, 3-inch thick witness. Carol and her two bored cronies, Susan and Mark, sat at a long table at the front, facing the audience. Carol was in her element. She thrived on this kind of public drama. She banged a gavel to call the meeting to order, a theatrical gesture of power. She began with her performance. It was a masterclass in manipulative rhetoric. Her voice trembled with manufactured emotion as she spoke of her tireless, thankless work to protect our community. She painted me as a rogue element, a bitter old man who refused to abide by the same rules as everyone else. She spoke of safety, of the danger my industrial machinery posed to the neighborhood children. She held up pictures of the concrete barriers, describing their removal as a violent, destructive act. "This is about more than just a driveway," she said, her voice rising to a crescendo, a tear glistening in her eye. "It's about respect, respect for the rules, respect for your neighbors, and respect for the authority of this board, which you elected to keep Northwood Pines a beautiful and safe place to live. Mr. Pendleton's actions are a slap in the face to all of us." She finished to scattered, supportive applause from her section. She sat down, looking smug and triumphant. She had framed the narrative. She was the valiant protector. I was the villain. "Thank you, Miss Fletcher," Ms. Davis said, standing up. Her voice was calm, clear, and cut through the emotional fog Carol had created. "We appreciate you sharing your perspective. Now, if you don't mind, we'd like to present a few facts." Carol waved a dismissive hand. "The facts are clear. He destroyed HOA property." "Let's talk about that property," Ms. Davis said, turning on the projector. The first image that flashed on the screen was my certified property deed, the legal description of my lot, highlighted in yellow. Exhibit A, the deed to Block C, Lot 4, registered to Arthur Pendleton. And, she clicked to the next slide, Exhibit B, the official county-filed plat map from 1996, showing the pre-existing driveway for Lot 4. As you can see, the area where the barriers were placed is, legally and indisputably, the private property of my client. A murmur went through the room. Carol's face tightened. "The covenants supersede old maps," she snapped. "Do they?" Ms. Davis replied smoothly. "Let's move to Exhibit C." An image of my unopened, refused certified letter appeared on the screen. "This is a letter Mr. Pendleton sent you 6 months ago containing these very documents, which you refused to accept. This establishes that you were made formally aware of his legal ownership and chose to willfully ignore it." The murmuring grew louder. Mark and Susan, the other two board members, were starting to look uncomfortable. Next, Exhibit D. The screen showed the sheriff's incident report. Ms. Davis read from Sergeant Miller's summary. Subject Fletcher was unable to produce any legal documentation to support her claim of ownership over the disputed property. Subject Pendleton provided a valid deed and certified survey map. Advised Fletcher the matter was civil, and she had no authority to block the driveway. Carol was no longer looking smug. She was looking pale. "And now," Miss Davis said, her voice dropping slightly, "let's talk about intent. Exhibit E." She pushed a button on the laptop, and George Henderson's audio recording began to play through the speakers. Carol's sharp, dismissive voice filled the silent room. "I don't care if it's his. Our rules say we control the access points. Possession is 9/10 of the law. That old man isn't going to fight back. We'll bury him in fines and legal fees." A collective gasp went through the audience. It was stunningly clear. It was a confession of malice. Mark and Susan stared at Carol, their faces masks of horror. They had been lied to. They were accessories. And then, the collapse. The moment the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Carol's face, which had been a carefully constructed sculpture of righteous indignation, seemed to melt. Her jaw went slack. The color drained from her cheeks. In that instant, she understood the depth of her miscalculation. She understood that she was not facing an old man who wouldn't fight back. She was facing a meticulous professional who had documented her every move. Ms. Davis let the silence hang in the air for a moment, before delivering the final, decisive blow. "And finally," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "let's discuss the very rules you've built your entire presidency on. Exhibit F." Two documents appeared on the screen, side by side. On the left was a scanned page from the official CC&Rs filed with the county. On the right was the corresponding page from the binder Carol had been distributing. Miss Davis used a laser pointer to circle Section 11.4b, the clause about controlling access points, on Carol's version. Then she moved the laser pointer to the official version, to the empty space where that clause should have been. "As you can see, the clause you have been using to justify your actions for the past 2 years does not exist in the legally binding covenants of this association," Ms. Davis announced. "It was fabricated," and she clicked to the final slide, which showed 2 signatures side by side. "The signature on the amendment page you distributed last year is, according to a forensic analysis, a forgery of the original founder's signature." The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting. Carol's supporters looked confused and betrayed. Her victims looked vindicated. "This is an outrage, a lie," Carol shrieked, but her voice was thin and panicked. "Is it, Miss Fletcher? Is?" Davis countered, her voice cutting through the noise. "Because a full copy of this presentation, including the audio recording and the evidence of forgery, was delivered to the county district attorney's office this afternoon. I believe they will be very interested in discussing your interpretation of the rules, not to mention your fraudulent use of association funds for this vendetta, as detailed in the invoices provided by Miss Sarah Jenkins." She nodded towards Sarah, who stood up and looked directly at Carol. That was it. The foundation of Carol's power, built on lies and a fraudulent document, had been systematically dismantled, piece by piece, with documented, undeniable fact. She stared blankly at the screen, at the evidence of her own undoing. Her little empire of beige mailboxes and lawn height regulations had crumbled or could dust. The meeting was over. Her reign was over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The meeting descended into a chaotic but unified call for an immediate vote of no confidence. Carol was stripped of her presidency on the spot. Mark and Susan, in a desperate act of self-preservation, voted against her. Sarah Jenkins was appointed interim president by a unanimous vote. The legal consequences for Carol were severe. The district attorney's office did indeed press charges. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had compiled, she pleaded guilty to felony forgery and misdemeanor fraud. She avoided jail time but was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution. The restitution was the most satisfying part. A court-ordered audit of the HOA's finances during her tenure revealed she had illegally levied over $30,000 in fines. Based on her fraudulent covenants, every last cent had to be paid back, either by her or her homeowner's insurance. That included the $100 I had paid for the violation of having a project truck, and even a $25 fine from 2 years prior for a garden gnome Eleanor had loved. A few weeks later, I received a check from the HOA for $125. I kept a photocopy of it before I cashed it. One last receipt for the folder. Furthermore, the court ordered her to pay my full legal fees, which amounted to just over $10,000. The cost of renting the concrete barriers and the flatbed for the excavator was billed directly to her as part of the damages. On paper, her attempt to control me had cost her dearly. The community began to heal almost immediately. Sarah's first act as interim president was to hold a document-shredding party at the clubhouse, where residents were invited to bring their violation notices from Carol's reign and feed them into a commercial shredder. It was a cathartic, symbolic cleansing. All of the petty vindictive rules were rescinded. The HOA went back to its intended purpose, managing the landscaping of the common areas and not the lives of the residents. The neighborhood changed. People started talking to each other again. George Henderson put his son's basketball hoop back up, and the sound of kids playing filled the evenings. Neighbors I had only ever nodded to now stopped to chat when I was out in the yard. They brought me cookies, a bottle of wine, a new tomato plant for my garden. They called me a hero. I told them I wasn't. I was just an engineer who read the instructions. I had simply organized the facts. The facts did all the work. Today, months later, I stand in my driveway. The sun is warm on my back. I'm polishing the chrome grille of the old F-15. Oh, the one that started it all. It gleams in the afternoon light. There are no barriers, no threatening notes, no sense of being watched. There is only the quiet hum of a peaceful Saturday. Carol and her husband sold their house at a loss and moved away. No one knows where they went. I walk back into my garage and look at the workbench. The manila folder is still there, though it's now closed and tied with a string. It sits next to my toolbox, a monument to a quiet battle, fought not with anger, but with documentation. It's a testament to the idea that order will eventually triumph over chaos, that fact will always outlast fiction. The whole affair was never really about a truck or a driveway. It was about the fundamental nature of ownership, about the simple right to be left alone on the small patch of earth that you call your own. It was about the difference between rules designed to create order and rules designed to create power. I pick up the folder. For a moment I consider throwing it away, but I can't. It's a part of my story now. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful tool you have is a receipt. The most effective weapon is a well-organized file, and the loudest statement can be made by the quietest man in the room, so long as he's done his homework. I place the folder on a high shelf, a closed chapter. I turn off the garage light and pull the door down. The deadbolt clicks into place, a satisfying, final sound, the sound of security, the sound of peace, the sound of order, restored at last. On paper, and in fact.